Hello. My name is Miles Ward. I'm a solutions architect from Amazon Web Services, but other than that, I'm proud to be a volunteer for Obama for America. This is the Obama for America tech team. Thank you. There are 7 folks here. I want to make clear there are many more folks than this, but these are the ones that we were able to snag out of the busy stuff they've been doing to come talk to you about the experience of running the campaign, the infrastructure that they developed on top of AWS, and all of the good things and all of the bad things about how that impacted the presidency. So first with that, I'd like to have each one of you guys just introduce yourself and say what you did. You go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Harper Reed, and I was the CTO for Obama for America, and I hired all these guys. That's pretty much the extent of what I did.
I'm Brian Holcomb. I was a DevOps engineer. I got hired on in May, so a lot of these guys started a lot earlier than I did.
My name is Ben Hagan. I was the security engineer for the technology team.
Hi, everybody. I'm JP. I was on the DevOps team with Brian and Scott, and thank you guys so much for the support.
Hi, I'm Leo. I am the Director of Systems Engineering for the Democratic National Committee, so I basically handle a lot of the infrastructure for the DNC.
Hi everybody, my name is Jay Edwards, and I was the lead database engineer, which is not really impressive considering there were 2 of us.
I think there were 3.
2.5.
My name is Scott Vandenplas, and I was the Director of DevOps, and I was one of the early folks in with Harper, laid the foundation for the rest of these awesome people to go and play and, elect a president.
So we want to make this vastly less formal than me standing here and looking silly. This is way too dry. So this whole group of people worked an incredible amount to build something that changed the way that Western democracy functions. I mean, that's as basic as it goes. Anybody want to talk through where it started? What was the very first time that you got maybe the call from Slavey, or what was the intro to this thing?
I think what illustrates this the most is we'll talk about my first day.
Yeah.
And I walked in the office, and there was nothing. And I said, what happened to all the source code from 2008? And they just went. And I think what happened is they burnt it in a victory dance pyre thing. I don't actually know, but there was a couple things that they would say, oh, here's this call tool from Nevada that we used for a couple days. And they would send it to me, and it would be a zip that had the .svn directories in it, but the repo was gone. And so you were just kind of SOL. And so that was the first couple days. And then from then, I first of all brought in many of my friends to help out, like Scott, and one of the things that we needed to do is we needed to lay the groundwork. We needed to lay the foundation. And so we had to make some strategic choices, specifically choices that would stick with us throughout the rest of the campaign. Because we knew that once come E-Day, we couldn't screw it up. And we were making those decisions in May 2011. And so that was hard and a lot of pressure, but we just, we chose Amazon immediately because it was easiest, and because we knew we could get pretty far with it. Well, we got all the way, but we didn't know that then.
Awesome.
Scott?
Awesome. Tell me about your first day.
I don't even remember my first day. Time in campaigns doesn't really exist. Everything is one day. There's no weekends. There's no nights. So I have a hard time remembering that. I could tell you the early choices on why do we choose AWS and how do we figure things out, because we were by no means AWS experts when we started at this. And I think that the path that we took there was just so easy to pick up and so quick, and if you understand traditional ops and you understand how that, if you've lived with the pain of that delay of the multi-week cycle of putting in servers and things like that, and I think all of us came from a traditional ops world, it was a little bit of a gamble in that we didn't have the full experience at the time. We just kind of trusted that we would hire very smart people that could figure it out. And it ended up being, I'd say, the first couple of apps we deployed were a complete nightmare for us. We didn't, they just did not go very well. But, you know, we learned a lot.
Well, I also deployed them, and I'm the worst ops person in the world.
This is true.
But one of the things that was very clear after I was, fat fingering my deploys was that we needed automation. So if there's one thread that brought us from the beginning to the end was automation. And a lot of this team helped create that automation and helped make sure that we followed through with that. And we certainly didn't have to. It would have been a lot easier just to willy-nilly deploy things as needed. But that automation is honestly what allowed us to scale to what we needed to scale to on E-Day, on the get out the vote time period, and all of the debates and all the fundraising goals and all that fun stuff. So go automation.
Quick question. What I saw, and I think you can see when you look at the diagrams and the other pictures of this thing that have come out, the incredible variety of systems that were deployed. Huge number of different applications, huge number of systems supporting those applications. Of all of those, JP, which was the most important application? The one that just couldn't fail?
I think you're talking about e-cards.
Correct you are, sir. So we had a couple of different sort of running jokes inside of the campaign, different systems where we way lighter than I expected, way more informal, way more creative than I think alternate approaches to this thing. What was the funnest thing for you inside the sort of day-to-day of campaigns?
Well, we had a lot of Nerf guns. I got extraordinarily good at throwing Whistler darts at these guys. And I'd like to apologize now for all the times where you were working and I hit you with a dart. But I think that was one of the main stories that a lot of the news cycles haven't really covered, is the camaraderie and the fun that we had. And that really, that made the bad times, which was most of the times, right? It was, incredible amounts of work, and it just never really stopped. But that made all of it really fun. And outside of just the mission and wanting to do this for the country, working with this group, it's kind of an insanely fun time.
I'd like to add that you do not work on a campaign to be rejuvenated or to feel good about yourself.
Well, one thing that we tried to do is we knew that it was going to be hard. We knew it was going to be long hours. We knew, honestly, that a lot of the work part was going to suck. So we tried to, as much as we could, make it the engineering environment that we wanted it to be. And so you look at all of these great companies. Etsy does a great blog on engineering culture, and there's a lot of companies that also do this, that we wanted to be like them as much as we could. So the engineers could do what they want. They could use the tools they wanted. We tried to be as social and collaborative as possible. We really tried to stand on all the shoulders of all these organizations that have made innovations in that world. And I think we did a pretty good job of that.
I think that we've worked together for we've known each other for about 12 years, and we've worked together for a long time now. And I think that there's the thread that kind of followed us through the campaign and even through our careers is we have this a pretty hard approach to technology agnosticism. We don't really care what you use, just make sure that you know how to use it and that it works. And that made it makes a very dynamic environment, gives you a lot of options.
And that's why we're going to Azure. Oh, just kidding.
So, on the subject, so Jay, there was a lot of different technologies that got used. How many different structured storage systems were in play behind the pieces that got built by this team?
So we used RDS, we used Dynamo, we had a Hadoop cluster, we used EMR, we had Vertica. I don't think we use SimpleDB for anything.
We use SimpleDB.
Yeah, we use SimpleDB.
Okay, so we use SimpleDB.
I mean, I personally used it, so.
Yeah, and we also used Asgard, which uses SimpleDB as well. So
We also used LevelDB.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We used App Engine.
S3.
S3.
Mongo.
Berkeley DB. There's that one Gabriel did.
Does this strike you as a deeply structured, regimented organization with tight controls around deployment management?
We tried so hard to make it tightly controlled, and
I worked against that.
Well, the thing was we knew that we were going to have like this diagram you see up here, you don't see the whole thing. And someone once asked, how did you choose what to do? And the answer was, we did everything. And then we aggressively, brutally cut when we came time for deadlines. But before that, we needed to be able to support all of these possible apps, and you never know what they needed. And sometimes it was hard because the technology stack wasn't something we had done. And sometimes it was easy because it just fit right in. But more often than not, we had to be creative.
One of the things that I think surprises people when I tell them is a lot of the work we did was not what I would consider technically interesting work. We were not, maintaining our own branch of MySQL. We weren't talking about Twitter or Facebook size traffic loads. It was just a lot of very common, straightforward, everyday tasks. And what made it difficult was the timeline, right? The dates don't move. Election day is November the 6th. Early voting in Iowa starts the day it starts. You can't go to someone and say, yeah, can we push this off a couple weeks?
I think it actually takes an act of Congress.
Yeah. So the constraints we dealt with kind of organizationally around and structurally around the problem that we were solving were much more difficult than most people deal with. But technically it wasn't hard.
Can I see a show of hands of people that have shipped a product on time? You're all lying, first off. So we just made our deadlines like October 1st. And we mostly made it. And then we spent a lot of time testing and failing. And that was the thing I think that was, if there was one thing I took away, is that you need to fail more often on purpose. And you need to be aggressive about your failures so you understand what happens when things break, because they will break. I keep saying technology is not our friend.
No.
It is not our friend. Don't trust it. But if you break it a lot, you can start to understand it a little bit more, which is what we did aggressively.
There's a couple places in some of the articles that have been published online that talk about the game days. Maybe, Brian, can you walk us through like some of the game day experiments that got done to see if this stuff would work?
On game day, I actually got assigned to reality duty, so while they were gaming, I had to deal with the actual problems that were happening. We had the first one, and the other guy that's not here, Nick Hatch, they basically ran it like a Dungeons & Dragons game. They would say, hey, your database just failed, and he would black hole that IP so that the app couldn't talk to the database at all. It seemed like a lot of fun from what I saw.
Well, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to do this. And so another person who wasn't here, Dylan Richard, and Nick Hatch worked together very closely, and they created the schedule of these are the failures that you'll have during this time. So they sent the schedule out to everyone, and the first one happened, and then they rearranged the schedule without telling anyone. So the idea was to surprise people. So they'd say, like, okay, all the SQS queues disappeared. And then we just fell on the floor because we didn't think that was going to happen, and we couldn't recover. But they would do things like, they would say, your database connectivity has disappeared, now what? And so then we'd have to practice moving over to West for RDS. Or suddenly our REST API was gone. How do the apps react to that failure? And we did this over and over and over again. And it actually was kind of brutal because there was a lot of emotions that go into that. You don't think about the drain of having to recover over and over again. And we did 2 full days, 2 Sundays that were full days of failure. And then during the same time, we also had some things that did fail. And so one of these happened to be the day before the big Amazon outage. What day was that? You might remember?
The Monday, the week before.
The Monday, the week before. Okay, so October 20 something or another. It was the day before that, so we practiced all of these failure situations that then we woke up and did again. And we didn't, yeah, it was awesome. It was one of my favorite days. But the thing was, we didn't go down. And the reason we didn't go down was because we just practiced it. If we wouldn't have practiced it, we would have had to learn during that time, and we didn't have to learn. And
I
it was
think
great.
we should talk about some of the things we picked up from that day too. There was a lot of I think really interesting lessons that are just generally applicable. Less monolithic apps is really a big one. You make sure that when things fail, they're compartmentalized, and that when they do fail, that they degrade in a nice way. Fail with a smile, basically.
I'm going to hog this thing some more. We just watched Bezos in his big keynote, and he talked about identifying failures early in the cycle or early in the process. And so we had a big API, which is not on the screen anymore, called Narwhal, and it roughly was just parse.com for campaigns. And what Narwhal did is a REST API. That was it. It just allowed it to show usernames across all the apps, basically. But if Narwhal went down, we needed all of our apps not to show errors to our users down the way. We needed to detect that defect and mitigate it right there and rapidly in real time. And so this is just an example of what Scott's saying about making sure your apps are decoupled, making sure that they aren't so reliant on one another that if the one that way early on, say RDS, fails, you're not affected in your user-facing app. That took a lot of work and a lot of engineering effort, and our engineers are amazing for making that happen.
Speaking of asynchronous data, we have a hashtag on Twitter, #OFATech. We will asynchronously receive your questions and then ask them to the panel. So we've got that up in here. If anybody has a question that you'd like to ask, happy to forward that to them.
So anybody here use RDS? Okay, so something specific that I learned coming from a more traditional MySQL environment is that for almost every RDS failure case, your response needs to be delete a replica and create a new one, right? You don't have necessarily a lot of the access to get in there and, oh, let's move the bin logs around, let's change stuff. It's almost always faster to just, like restore from snapshot, recreate a replica, rather than trying to fix whatever your specific problem is. A lot of times when we be like, maybe the EBS underlying this instance is slow. Let me just create a new replica and we'll find out.
I just want to add, I think it's cute that you said you come from a traditional MySQL environment. Jay was the 9th engineer at Twitter, and there's nothing less traditional than that as far as I'm concerned.
So a couple of different things. Another area that I want to make sure we talk through, because I think it's a pretty fascinating part of the system that was built. There was a lot of work that was done around fault tolerance, around high availability, around the structures of each of these pieces. You'll note in almost every one of the pictures, there's the little orange arrows that are auto-scaling. There's also here, you're seeing sort of Asgard and pieces like that. Maybe, I don't know whether that's Scott or JP or wants to talk through, general approaches to high availability at the app tier.
I can start us off and just kind of go from there. I think that we can talk about specific examples or in the abstract. I'm a big fan of examples. And we can, there was actually a Hacker News thread that followed our front-end team. A member of our front-end team, Kyle Rush, wrote a great write-up of the way that we did the donation processing system. And that was a really interesting project because that was our first multi-region app. And really, it was probably the most fault-tolerant app that we had. All of the content was being served out of S3. It was built by Jekyll. We had the front-end team was just updating that directly, and then it was proxying through to a JavaScript wrapper around our payment API. But that was amazing because it could suffer. I mean, it could lose its entire database, every vendor, and it would still. And it did. And actually, there was a moment where
Scott,
we realized
real quick,
that. Yeah.
I want to jump in here and say what Scott just described was basically Stripe. We inadvertently created Stripe on our own because we needed to solve all these other rules, so we couldn't use Stripe. But it was like, how do we build this thing that has to be completely fault tolerant? And in a way, it has to be fail-safe. It can't, much like you have to land a space shuttle after everything breaks, we can't have it disappear because contributions are so important.
And this came into play. We had, as we were running up to Election Day and we were getting in more and more donations, it just really blows through the roof by the time you're in the debates, and then just kind of carries through. And the RDS instance was undersized for what we had behind it, and so we just took it down. Harper did not want that.
This was in the middle of the vice presidential debate.
Yeah.
And so using SQS.
And they lied to me.
Yeah,
they were like, "Oh, look over there," and I was like, "Oh, look." And then
I sent Harper into his office, and then I just did it.
We were able to take donations that entire time. It was about 3 minutes to upsize that database, and because what our developer Nick Leeper and Ivan had worked on was a way to detect when PayPal or CyberSource went down and take steps to address it there. We additionally had another vendor, Blue State Digital, Kyle mentioned them in the write-up, also taking donations. So then during that vice presidential debate, because we had built so many pieces of fault tolerance in, and with use of SQS queues, we were able to just bring our contributions database down in the middle of the debate, and nobody knew. Nobody even blinked.
Okay, so this is just a thought. So everybody here knows about Chaos Monkey. Netflix uses it. It goes around and destroys pieces of your infrastructure. And I love you, Miles, and I love AWS. If you use AWS long enough at scale, it's like its own Chaos Monkey, right? Stuff is just gonna go away for you, and you have to be ready for it. So we were very proactive about it. Most organizations I've been with haven't. It's something to keep in mind.
So the first of our asynchronously delivered questions, how much A/B testing went on? What did you do to tune and adjust applications based on that?
This is a hard question to answer because I don't think any of us were really directly involved with A/B testing of our front-end applications, but there's been some coverage of this onto interwebs, and so that's probably a better place. I know that's not as satisfying of an answer, but we mostly just played with servers.
I can give you rough stats. I know that we did some front-end A/B testing with email sends that I don't know exactly where the numbers come from, but there was something like a 47% increase in conversion rates, and we used Optimizely. 46%, Jay is correcting me.
We did a lot of testing, though, and there was a whole team that dedicated to this. KyleRush.com, I think, is Kyle's.net. He just wrote a big blog post that talks about this directly. So it's a good place to go check out for the answer.
So another of our Twitter-based questions. How did we get all of the non-techies, I'm thinking specifically Jim Messina, to chill out and be okay with the fact that the UX wasn't done yet while you're building the back end for this whole thing?
And that's what I did.
Yeah, and it was not very effective.
One of the most important things that the campaign had going for it was, to the very top, they were very engaged or they bought technology. And so the CTO for 2008 wore a blazer and golfed and was not like us. No beard, very clean shaven. Maybe had some HTML skills and could do some JavaScript. Slavey, seems right.
He knows enough to know where he should stop.
Yeah, so when he was charged with hiring a new CTO, he needed someone that knew technology, so he hired me, and then I hired people that actually knew technology. And so that was the difference. And so that was from the top. And I've said this before, where there was a certain point where I realized that this was much like Moneyball, and Slavey was Billy Bean, and sadly that meant I was Google Boy, but this was something that they had really bet on technology, really bet that we could do it, and from the very beginning, they invested in that. And so when we sat there and said, look, this is iterative, we're going to be releasing mini versions of this app, it's not quite done yet, although their minds were blown because it wasn't done, there was a lot of frustration, they waited with us till it was done. And there was a lot of tough times, but come 2012, it was great, and it worked out very well.
So we released a whole bunch of new products in the last 2 days. Which one of those are you most frustrated that we didn't get out ahead of time?
Redshift.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah. I better give the mic to Jay, because I bet he's probably got a thing or two to say about that.
Yeah, so we used Vertica for, DNC, Vertica. We used Vertica for a lot of our analytics, and it was physical hardware. It was the only real part of our system that was hard boxes. And as the amount of data increased, and as you get closer to the election, the loop upon which people want to act becomes much shorter, right? Instead of like, oh, I want to run this report every week, they're like, I would like to run it every 2 hours. And you can't just say, oh, I need to buy 150 boxes, and then on November the 7th, I want those to all go away. And that was a real problem for us. We built a few clusters in the cloud, but it's really difficult to move 30 or 40 terabytes in a timely fashion. So yeah, I'm very excited for Redshift and wish we had had it a year ago.
Yeah, and towards the end, by election time, we, several months before had to order, new nodes, and even on an expedite, that's like 3 weeks usually. So, if we had Redshift, it'd be a lot easier to just click a button and get another node.
I think it's finally done rebalancing though.
So one of the other parts of this that I think is interesting for folks is just given the number of different systems and the amount of development work that was going on, maybe somebody can help me understand even a little better, because it always seemed relatively magical to me. Talk me through the deployment process. Like, what did it look like to push something out the door?
Okay. So all the code was in GitHub. The developers would tag it, and they would tag it with V and then like a version number. And it started out where we would have to build that into a Debian package manually. Eventually we got it automated to where as soon as they tagged it, we'd get the GitHub post receive hook. That would get built by something we called Build Cosby. And then it would spit out a Debian package. I'm sorry. We would take that, put it in a repository, and then if it was, we got more into templating the boxes later on using Asgard, but basically we would kick Puppet. It would do an apt-get update. Oh, there's a new version of the app. I need to restart the web server. So it was pretty streamlined. It wasn't always super effective, but.
I think the key components of that are Puppet for configuration management. We did use Puppet for deployment. We used Ubuntu entirely on almost everything, I think. And so it was nice and clean. We actually just built Debian packages and used an apt repo, just an SSH auth app repo to install apps. And that worked for a long time. And then eventually we got to the point, though, where there's just when you have 25 million Twitter followers, 35 million Facebook followers, and an email list that's in the multiple millions of people on it, that system-wide full send goes to about 100 million people at like the second tier.
And we never actually, for some reason, we always found the bugs after they'd hit send.
Yeah. We already knew that you hit send, actually. And the thing with that is that if you can't scale in seconds, if you're counting your nodes coming online in minutes, I don't even want to know how much a minute of downtime would have cost in the donation system. I don't know, and please no one ever look that up.
We wound up really modifying this deployment process. When I started in February and Scott brought me in, we were going ahead building those packages, and then it was using Fabric, manually pushing that out. And as we progressed, as they said, we started using things like Asgard, and we wrote a script that I started out writing a shell alias because I was really sick of typing fab commands. And about 7 hours later, I had an 800-line deployment script that would play Star Trek sounds.
And it was still a shell alias, too.
So this is an important sort of public resource. Like there was critical value that was constructed, but it was also something that was very contentious. Did this ever come under attack? Was this ever something that was the target of something worse than people hitting refresh too fast?
Yes, it was. So yeah, if you can zoom out, this is a really big perimeter to defend in terms of security and protecting it from all of the various threats that are out there.
We're missing whole regions.
So yeah, there's a lot of different applications out there that have a lot of different requirements in terms of how they interconnect with other things on the internet and with each other. We built a very complicated system, and we had a lot of people that were very interested in breaking that system. So I think, generally we tried to prevent that by having really good development practices, talking with developers, helping them understand the threats that might be out there, how they might be attacked. Uh-oh.
Whenever Ben would find cross-site scripting on one of our sites, he would punish the developers by putting this animated, what was it, a otter holding a fish, and it would play Kenny Loggins. And as soon as the developers saw that, they knew they had to fix it.
You can only describe the otter dance as erotic.
The otter dance? So yeah, I think public embarrassment is a very important part of security. So whenever you find a problem, and I think that speaks to proactive testing also, right? So it's important that you test the applications before people on the internet get a chance to test them. But yeah, once you find a problem, embarrass the person who made it, and then help them understand how to fix it and how not to do it, and then make that a lesson for the entire organization. And I think overall, I think we did a really good job with it. We had really great developers, really great DevOps people, and I think we did really well.
I can talk about one example where Amazon really saved us during an attack too. There was we had a UDP flood, and it was just based against an actual hardware load balancer that was just doing redirects for the one of the domains. And how long did that take us to build? Like 15 minutes? Yeah, 15 minutes, deployed multi-region, easy redirector. It was nothing, and I don't know. That was a lot of fun. That was like the true test of, can you pull this off? Those are the fun moments where it's you actually have to do this live, real, and if you screw up, the president's website goes down.
So I think a great question has come in. There's a very high ratio of beard on stage. There have been a couple of different pictures that have gone out that have all of these sort of fuzzy dorks. Can you guys give the shout outs to all the ladies involved in the technology team that weren't able to make it out? Because there were some spectacular operators.
Well, we had absolutely. We had a lot of really good folks working with us, and obviously they don't all have beards, myself included. I'm terrible at growing facial hair, unfortunately.
Not like us.
But we worked with a couple. Carol Davidson was the Narwhal product manager, and she did a heck of a job. She actually worked on a product called the Optimizer. She pretty much came up with that idea herself. And that, if you've read an article out there about the Optimizer, what it did was basically take demographics for television shows and allowed us to buy really cheap instead of spending all of the ad money on big national television channels. We were able to instead go kind of niche. If we knew that a certain demographic was watching, Top Gear, and we wanted to reach them, Carol's Optimizer helped us do that.
This is there was that buzzword early on, micro-targeting, and this is a great example of specifically that.
So this is actually something that I think that we didn't do a great job of. I mean, we did a decent job for what is out there, but we also had another woman product manager, Mari, who was awesome. But I want to take a minute and talk about how much we need to change, especially ops, to make it friendly for women to work in that environment. There's a lot of neckbeardiness to our world, and we don't always make a welcoming, open environment for women and non-Asian minorities. So you guys here need to get better so that we can all hire these people and get them into our worlds. That's where innovation comes from, is diversity, and we need that. So please do better.
So I think there's a kind of a pressing question that's come from a whole bunch of different angles, and I know it's a hard one to answer, and so I appreciate the complexity of this, but I think what got built, and I'm hoping everybody here appreciates that what got built is a pretty amazing thing, and there's a lot of value that was constructed. What if anything, can you tell us about even just basic archival? What did we do to save the value that was here? Is there any plans to release this software or any of that kind of stuff? I mean, that's something that's very interesting for folks.
You're gonna make Harper cry.
We don't know.
Yeah. So everybody here, if that's something that you want to have happen, tell everybody that seems like a valuable thing to get done. We really want to see that all get put together.
It's obviously going to help support. Like, I don't know how many of you guys use Dashboard. Did anyone here use Dashboard? Big volunteer crowd here. Anyway, we created this app called Dashboard. That's going to help support the president and his policies going on to the future. So some of the stuff will live on, but we don't actually know where it's going to go, where it's going to live yet, and I'm sure we'll find out soon. And we all have hopes. We did open source something kind of poorly, a voter registration app that the OSM people didn't like how we did it. So we're going to hopefully do that again with some of our other apps, but better and MIT licensed instead of our own secret license. But hopefully stay tuned.
I will say that Slaby, the guy that we all worked for, told me on a number of times, he's like, if this technology is only used this one time, we have failed, right? We have not, we're going to be the situation that Harper was in 2008, where he walks in and there's some, zip files and the repositories are all gone. And institutionally, we don't want that to happen. What the mechanics of that look like, though, are still kind of up in the air. The president's a busy guy. He's got stuff to do.
So these are all AWS users. This is an AWS conference. We have AWS folks trying to understand best practice in the cloud. There's every conceivable different sort of pattern of architecture and best practices embodied someplace in some corner of the deployment. What's the most important stuff that you'd tell new users, existing users to maybe take into account as they look at their designs, or things they want to make sure that they're taking advantage of?
AMI deploys right away. Like number one, go straight to AMIs, for sure. And then the rest of it, try to make your configurations as generic as possible so that you don't have to manage a ton of options on the various nodes. That's just related to the AMI builds, though, really.
I'd say multi-AZ. A lot of the challenges and opportunities that we've had along the line would have been really much easier to deal with had we, for every single app, really gone 3 availability zones, not just 2. We started with 2, but as we progressed and worked with Miles, thanks for the great advice, go 3 availability zones for all of your load balancers, all of your auto scale groups.
Use Bodo.
Oh, yes.
Can we get a high five for Mitch Garnett, the writer of Bodo, please?
The other thing I would say is provisioned IOPS. Start paying for those now. They're wonderful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a sea change in a couple different.
This is something very basic, but also very useful. If you're hosting like a little microsite, just host it on an S3 bucket. This is the way we hosted all of our little microsites. The best example is RomneyTaxPlan.com, which we had no idea it was going to get a ton of traffic. It was #1 on Reddit. It had a ton of traffic, and we had no problems keeping it up whatsoever.
Did you guys actually see that site? I really loved it. It was brilliant. It was all it was a button that moved around when you tried to click it.
Try to get Miles to help you as well.
And from a security perspective, I think stop thinking about your networks like they were 5 years ago. You need to focus on the application, make sure that's secure. That's the target. The hardware is no longer the target. Stop thinking about security from 5 years ago. Think about it next year. Think about how your application meets those needs for you and how you can leverage this stuff to kind of mitigate some of your threats.
Now, there have been some changes that I'm not totally cognizant with, but Miles might be able to help. Try to use VPCs from the get-go. It's really difficult to migrate. Like, we have RDS instances, and we're like, oh, well, if you have an ELB and a VPC, you can load balance internally. But trying to move all the security groups and parameter groups over was just, we didn't have enough time. And being on a giant tin net with all the rest of you people, it's a hostile environment. Use VPCs from the beginning.
And there's, I'd say, along with what I said before with don't make your apps monolithic, also build multi-region early. It only gets harder later on. So just be cognizant of what that means. When you are pretty fresh in your project.
For me, I think the one thing I'll take away from this experience is I remember first reading about Chaos Monkey and thinking, oh, that's cute, like they kill their boxes. But practice breaking, practice failure, go through all of the scenarios that you possibly can think of where things don't go right. because I'm guessing that will happen more often than they go right. It really saved us.
Yeah, and experiment constantly. I mean, we built hundreds of thousands of environments, which did crush and kill some vendors.
We use Cloudability, which is a great vendor for just kind of visualizing your costs. And I remember when we launched the Let's Experiment portion of the campaign, and I just watched this graph go like this, and I was just like, ugh.
Miles, apparently, I think the Cloudability folks are here. Yeah. And Miles said, hey, you should go and hang out and meet them. I'm like, they were my enemy.
So that's a good point. What are the other tools that deserve a shout out? What helped as you guys were kind of getting to the finish line?
Puppet, New Relic. New Relic is
New Relic.
Who here uses New Relic? Let's go the other way. Who doesn't use New Relic? You're paying too much for your DevOps people.
Yeah. You're also doing it wrong.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like cheating. Yeah, New Relic, I feel like I need to pipe to at least like 3 or 4 different commands to just generate one of those charts, and it made it pretty darn effortless. I think the other one that we had mentioned earlier, Asgard, Netflix, you guys did a really nice job releasing that.
There were also a ton of scripts that we wrote internally. Scott wrote a ton of them for managing costs on Dynamo, for the DNS resolver. So you could put in an instance ID .ec2.boprod.net, and it would give you the IP address. Spot instance pricing, tons. There's a huge arena where there just tools don't exist that we created a bunch of, little one-off scripts that I'm sure everybody else has. And it would be interesting to me to set up a GitHub repository and try and kind of collect all of those utility scripts together and get them out.
Also, Chartbeat was awesome.
Yeah, Chartbeat was great.
I think from security perspective, Suricata is a great IDS. It's open source, pseudo snort compatible. There's another great IDS software out there called Bro IDS. It's a great enterprise solution for monitoring traffic, looking for idiosyncrasies and that kind of thing. So I highly recommend checking those out.
Sweet.
I want to give an anti-shout out to Exchange.
Seconded.
Well, wait a minute. What about Campfire? Campfire gets a shout? That worked
Yes,
pretty
Campfire. Any of you looking to hire us, if you use Exchange, we're not going to work for you, sorry.
We use Basecamp a lot for our internal projects. That was, I think, one thing we haven't really talked very much about. And so I think the agility on these teams kind of flew counter to the way that it seems like political campaigns used to get done. And so Basecamp, Campfire was a good set of utilities for us.
Campfire is how we ran the President AMA on Reddit, which was pretty awesome. All of the questions went through Campfire, and we posted them to the president, and then he answered them.
And that was actually him answering, if anyone is wondering.
So could you have actually logins to the president then?
Yikes. So we're getting near the end of the time, but I want to give everybody who participated an opportunity to sort of say anything you'd like to this group. This is this team I think did some pretty amazing things, but I think every one of them has sort of a real depth and a real wealth of information about how our systems work, how to build systems that work, and I really am hoping that everybody has an opportunity to catch them after these presentations and going forward to just learn what they learned. But any last words?
Well, I think for me, I was kind of surprised coming out of the campaign. I see your graph here. I see this giant chart that we built, and in real time, it didn't feel like a very big deal. It just felt, like a lot of work, but it didn't feel like we were reinventing anything. We didn't change the world. It didn't feel like day to day. But then, in the aggregate, you look back and you're like, that's a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of talk about the difference between the different approaches that the various campaigns are taking now, and took throughout this election cycle, and it's I would say that there was nothing magical, there was nothing special that we did. It was a lot of I mean, really, the ground game of the election is what it's all about. And I think that like Mitch Stewart, Jeremy Bird, Marlon Marshall, those guys are really the true like heroes in my eye. They're the guys that run all that like get out the vote effort. They're the ones that are coordinating the people in the offices and all that. And when it comes down to it, I think that it's a prime example of just getting the fundamentals right. And we don't really live in a world where you can screw up fundamentals these days. I mean, that just can't happen. And it's, just the team that we had just worked harder, and it was great. I don't know. It was a fantastic experience for me.
I'd like to thank all the volunteers also. We had
Yeah,
wonderful,
absolutely.
Not just in the field, but we had wonderful people like Miles who volunteered time to help us in a technical capacity and helped us figure out problems that we may not have figured out on our own, gave us great advice, and of course everybody out in the field who knocked on doors and made phone calls and helped re-elect the president.
The team we had was the best team that I've ever worked with, and it was great. Some of these guys here are looking for jobs, so if you have companies, they're looking to be employed. I think their starting salary is about $750,000 a year, just talk to them after. But it was an amazing team that we got together in a very short amount of time, and we really were able to work together to be the force multiplier that the ground game needed.
Anything else? Everybody good? Yeah? No? Awesome. I think we can take the room for as long as we want it. Right? We're kind of in charge. Oh, you gotta go. Well, if Jay's gotta go, we're done. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank these guys for the hard work.